I've never been more bullish in the cattle market in my entire life than I am right now for long-term profitability in the beef business across sectors. But I think the realism is set in that maybe we found a level where we're going to have to operate in.
Well, I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like something's just a little different in this cattle market. And after months of setting one record after another, prices have pulled back just enough that I think for a lot of us, we're beginning to ask, have we reached the top? So is this simply a healthy correction, or is there something more developing beneath the surface? Well, this week, Superior Livestock Representative Clint Berry joins us to separate perception from reality and then explain also what today's market really is telling us as we look ahead into the fall.
Has there been a little softening? Has there been a correction? Yes, there has. Is the market still tremendous? Yes, it is.
We'll discuss what the week in the Rockies sale is telling us about our current market. Why Clint says the long-term outlook has never been stronger, and the steps producers should be looking at as they prepare to market this year's calf crop. That's on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, talking markets with Clint is always a great conversation, and today's is no different. Hi, everyone. Justin Mills here, host of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We're going to get to that conversation in just a few moments, but did want to let you know, coming up later on in the show, Dr. Elizabeth Ballou with Purina joins us as we discuss why knowing what you have and then adapting to changing conditions really can make all the difference in your operations profitability. A great discussion with Dr. Ballou on that. Then later on, meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at that long-range weather. So a complete and full show for you here today. Be sure to stay tuned throughout the entirety of that. By the way, if you do miss something, you can catch all of our shows by going to workingranchrradio.com, or you can find us on any podcast provider as well. Hey, the summer issue of Working Ranch Magazine has been out now for about a month or so, but the next issue, they're working on that, and I'll tell you what, right now, it's going to be a very special one. So if you don't have a subscription now, you can get one started by going to workingranchmag.com. And don't forget, you can also stop by your local Tractor Supply store and pick one up off the shelf. And a shout out here today to the Tractor Supply store in Dothan, Alabama, in Dublin, Georgia, in Durant, Oklahoma, and in Eaton, Ohio. And finally, just wanted to mention that what we're working on for the next edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show is on the topic of data centers. Yeah, I know it's a little controversial out there. I'm not sure of all the information about it myself, which is why I want to share that conversation with you all. So be sure to tune in on the next Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, let's get into our topic here today. And returning back with us is Mr. Clint Berry. He is out of St. Angelo, Texas. I've been a Superior rep for several years. And Clint, always good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Well, thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. It's always great to get to join you and get a chance to visit a little bit. Our conversations are always well looked forward to.
Yeah, they definitely are. It's something I always talk about this every time you come on. We always have our February report, and then about midsummer, after we get finished up with the week in the Rocky sale, it's always good to get kind of caught up and see where are things going. And with that in mind, and we were talking about this, we sort of had a discussion about where things were at. A month ago, we had Bailey Ballou on with Superior Livestock, of course, a partner there with you guys, and Corn Belt Classic coming out of that, and a lot of optimism in the market. And when I got on with you today, I said, Clint, does it feel like there's pressure in the market? I mean, fundamentally, everything is good, but does just there feel like there's a cloud in the market? And your thought and your response was?
Yeah, the market, let's put it all in perspective. The market is outstanding. I mean, the Corn Belt is probably going to go down as the highest market that we are ever experienced there in that market in June last month. And once again, we roll into the week in the Rockies to over 240,000 head selling. And we had a absolutely tremendous market. Had it softened from the Corn Belt? Yes, I don't think anybody would deny that. Like a snapshot, looking at a lot of those Montana calves, me and my team, we sold several sets of Montana calves for fall delivery, and those cattle were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $25 cheaper than what they were on the Corn Belt, relatively speaking. And that sounds like a lot of money. That sounds like, oh my gosh, the market's collapsing. But you have to put it in perspective. We're selling those cattle in the $4, sometimes $5 range, depending on what the weights are. And so you're talking probably a change of somewhere between 5, maybe 10% in total value, more around the range of 5 if you do the math like that. So I mean, has there been a little softening? Has there been a correction? Yes, there has. Is the market still tremendous? Yes, it is. Is the producer still in the driver's seat for profitability long term? Absolutely, they are. It's just a reaction of the fact that we've probably reached the ceiling for 2026 on prices because we've been capped. We tried to break $4 boxes and we've tried to break 260 fat cattle, and we ran against the resistance there multiple times trying to break through that ceiling, and it didn't happen. And I think that's just a reflection of the value and where we're at and what we're going to live with in this market for the balance of the year. And so now that we've kind of seen where the high is, and maybe some people would argue with me on that, maybe we will have a correction that goes higher. But fundamentally, I think I want to paint a picture of optimism because it is.
Yeah.
But there's also a little bit of realism in there. These calves that we've been selling at these all-time highs are buyers, and God bless them, because there's no greater optimist in the world than the American cattle feeder. But there's a lot of these cattle that are being bought for $200, even $300 above break-even prices, with the assumption that those cattle are going to gain that back and more to make them a little profit at the end. So it's there. The optimism's there. The fundamentals are still there. We're still the smallest cow herd in 7 decades. I mean, the pressure is still there, but I would say that a little bit of realism has settled in, and a little bit of probably taking a little risk management on, just to shore yourself up financially.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, Clint, you look at where we've been over the course of let's take the last 3 years in this market, definitely steadily been growing. And you look at this, as I had said earlier, fundamentally, everything is still the same. We see the smallest U.S. cattle inventory we've seen, beef production remaining high, consumer demand still fairly strong, herd rebuilding is very slow. So fundamentally, there's everything that we were talking about a year ago. But from a psychological standpoint, people get nervous when you walk on a high line a long time. You start to get nervous, don't you?
Yes, sir. That is correct. That's very correct. You know, when I gave you my opinion on the market and we talked about that, I've never been more bullish in the cattle market in my entire life than I am right now for long-term profitability in the beef business across sectors. But I think the realism is set in that maybe we found a level where we're going to have to operate in.
Yeah. I want to quickly kind of just go through a couple different segments within our industry and kind of get your feel. I know you feed some cattle yourself. Neither you nor I would be considered one of the top 4 packers or a packer in general. Okay. But let's just go through those different segments and kind of tell me what you're hearing from the feedlot side of things. I know, the Mexican deal is definitely affecting some of those southern feeders a little bit, but just in general, what are you feeling from the feedlot segment side of this industry?
Well, there's still a lot of pressure to be able to fill pens across the board. I mean, the reality is we have infrastructure bigger than what the cow herd is right now. Fundamentally, that's what's driving that lower supply is what's driving a lot of this value in the beef industry. But then on top of that, we are coupled with some great blessings in the fact that we are the world's most sought after protein. And in the U.S., we create the best of the beef that there is in the world. Our consumers continue to show that they're willing to pay more for beef. And even on a per capita consumption, that is slowly gaining ground too, even though it's by far outweighing our protein competition by 3 or 4 times, depending on the cuts that you're talking about. So it's incredible to be in a time where we have the highest demands for our product and at a highest price level for our product, on top of the fact that we're running short on supply. And that's driven a lot of dollars into that protein complex, and the producers are capturing a larger share of that than we have in the past, for certain.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next segment in that chain, and that would be, of course, the packer. And there's some pressure in that industry just in the fact we see Fort Morgan, not sure where that plant's going to go, some other closures in there. But kind of your thoughts as you have discussions with other folks across the industry about that segment. And I realize both you and I are kind of armchair in this because we're not in their seat, but just what do you feel?
Yeah, and that's right. We've been blessed with adding some regional packers, smaller size packers, adding additional players into the formula. Has our overall chain space increased that much? Probably not, with Lexington shutting down by the time you add the others up. But we are a lot more efficient and we're a lot more modernized on what's out there. And we have different players bidding on cattle, and that's healthy for us too. It's easy to say when you're on the cattle side that we need more hook space. It's hard to justify the hook space if we don't have the cattle to fill it. And that's partially what we're dealing with there. But the packers they are not profitable at this time. I don't know that anybody listening to the show would really be upset about hearing that, but that's, that is a segment that is not making money right now. They're going to have some dynamics and some leverage there. That's, they've incentivized to make the cattle bigger. We are changing the way that the time on feed that we're feeding cattle, and we're producing the same tonnage with less head, or close to the same tonnage with less head, because we're feeding these cattle longer. I mean, I don't think you talk to any feeder in the country that hadn't been incentivized to make their cattle 50 or 100 pounds heavier than what they had, say, 5 years ago. Even the grid pricing is incentivizing that, to a point. There's always to a point that then the cattle are too big, too inefficient. But there's that whole part is working, and it's just nice. Like I say, it's nice to see the consumer gravitate to us and continue to showcase that what they're willing to pay for great tasting beef. That's the kicker there. That is probably the golden goose for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Clint, let's take a break here. And when we come back, we've talked about, I should say, the fundamentals, and there's really a lot of reasons to be very optimistic as we look ahead, not only for this fall and even in future years on that. But I also want to just kind of pick your brain as far as just some things from the outside that you're looking at and say, hey, we kind of need to be watching this. So I want to talk about that when we come back, okay?
Yes, sir.
Your pasture is under attack. Yeah, horn flies. They're wreaking havoc on your herd, dealing damage to your cattle's weight, and in turn, that does affect your bottom line. That's why you need a solution in your arsenal that can withstand an attack. Alticid IGR is the first and proven feed-through that is battle-tested as an effective hornfly management product, delivering the defense needed to keep your herd productive and your profit strong. Win the battle for your cattle. Learn more at AlticidIGR.com. All right, Clint, we talked about as we went to break, there are really a lot of reasons to be optimistic in this market. And with that in mind, though, even though we see a little dip, it kind of causes everybody just a kind of a cold shiver to go down your back when you see these markets and these prices come down just a little bit and you start reverting back, kind of get this twitch, So with that in mind, though, I want to just be real, though, too, with folks that are listening. And we all need to just kind of know fundamentally what else is going on, that from the outside, as you look at this industry and we go up about 20, 30,000 feet, just some things that, let's be watching this. I mean, it doesn't necessarily override the fundamentals that we talked about in the first segment, but it's some things, factors that could be affecting our market, maybe not in the near term, but what about 3, 5, and 7, 10 years down the road? Is there anything like that you just, as you kind of ponder and think over the long haul, anything that goes through your mind?
Sure. There's several things that draw you to sit down and really think, maybe even grab a cocktail and kick your feet up and clear your mind to concentrate on it. But our great trading partners to the north and south, Mexico and Canada, both are investing in infrastructure internally. That's a good thing for them. And it's not something that's necessarily a direct threat in the short term, but long term, it's something that we need to be aware of. We closed the border down due to the screwworm and weren't bringing the Mexican cattle across, and that has hurt a lot of our southern feeders, which is some of the largest feeding capacity in the entire country. And that's been a real challenge. And Mexico as a country has had to adapt to that, of course. You can imagine if the tables were turned, how that would feel to us when we were shipping 1 million head of cattle across the border to be finished somewhere. And they've poured a lot of resources into building the infrastructure there themselves. And that's going to change the long-term dynamics of this, even if the border was to open tomorrow. We're never going to get back the full capacity that we had out of there. And that's just something we're going to have to adapt to. That I don't know what those numbers are going to look like. I don't know if we're going to feed half the cattle we used to from that portion, or 80%, or what that looks like. And part of that's probably going to get answered with how long the border stays closed. And that's a tricky subject to talk to different producers, because our southern cattlemen, our feeders down there, rely on that. They've built infrastructure domestically to handle that, and they're really suffering. I think, in my mind, I hope cooler heads prevail and we base everything on science, but we do it in a healthy way. But even if we open that border, it's not like it's going to be turn the spigot on and let the water run over the dam. I mean, it's going to be a slow process with inspections and quarantines and cattle following through. But at some point that's going to happen. I don't know when, that depending on what side of the fence you're looking at or where, maybe even where you're located, that may sound like a positive or a negative, but that's a vital part of our infrastructure. And it's part of the reason that we're hurting to maintain that capacity. Canada's really pouring in on cattle. They've been very aggressive getting cattle bought and, that are going to be finished up there. And so there's some changing dynamics there that we're going to have to adjust to just because, especially if we don't grow the cow herd, the domestic cow herd. By full means, I expect us to grow some, but does anybody believe that we're going to add 4 or 5 million cows over the course of the next decade to the herd? Mm-hmm. But I think there's too much pressure outside the industry. There's too much pressure on labor. There's too much pressure on the price of ground and the availability of resources in that. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on agriculture that doesn't have anything to do with the so-called fundamentals of just supply and demand that we have to fight through. And those are all changing things that we're going to have to adapt to. Yeah. That's just going to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Clint, you talked about in the first segment that the consumer has been a very good advocate for our beef product. They've liked what we've been able to produce and provide to them. And I can't help but think as we talk about consumer demand, and I think with that in mind, while that demand has been strong, continues to be strong, there's other things that now over several years have started to compete for the family dollar. And we've seen, whether it's fuel prices or whether it's just the cost of doing business or life has gone up. And every time that does, it's going to affect some decisions at the grocery store. Is that something that we're starting to deal with now?
And the political mindset, what you just asked me is affordability. That's the new code word running around. And the reality is that's the world we live in. I mean, every single thing costs more. Every service costs more. Every product costs more. The marginal value between them may be similar if you keep it in perspective, but it's been incredibly encouraging in my mind to see how the consumer has responded to the price of beef really since the COVID era and forward. In the last 6 years, just seeing how they've continued to be supportive. Are they challenged? Yeah, you have to be. I mean, you just go to a grocery store and pick out a ribeye, and it's probably going to be $25 or $30, depends on what store you're at and how good quality it really is. But I also keep it in perspective. Everything we do has got an increase in price. And when you put it in perspective for that bite of protein and the nutrition that we get out of beef to fuel ourselves is still pretty affordable, even if it is at all-time highs. And I find that encouraging. You look at some of the checkoff data from consumer perception, and we've got 85 to 90% of the consumers surveyed that consider beef to be a great protein and a great choice for their families. And I think back 40 years ago in the 80s when we kind of had a slap in the face there because we had a product that was inconsistent and wasn't nearly as favorable. And I think we've come a long way with our genetics and our marketing and our animal health and everything that we've done to supply that. I just feel like the hard work that's been put in the decades in front of us is finally really paying off. And I think that should be an encouragement. I really do. And our export markets continue to open up. I mean, I know we're importing a lot of meat. Most of that is trim, of course, because we're running short on the trim that we need to add to make our ground meat. But it's encouraging to see the value there. That value proposition is tremendous. And I just think it provides a long, profitable future for us. If we can control our other expenses and stay in business, I think the demand from the consumer for our product, both domestically and internationally, is just key right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we kind of switch directions here just a little bit. So as you look ahead in this, what are you anticipating where this market is going to head? And again, some of this is just kind of ballparking this, but if we look 6 to 12 months out, fundamentally, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we're seeing,
Sure.
we're at the lowest numbers. But when you look out about 12 months out from now, what are you feeling? Where do you think this market's going to look at?
We've launched this market last 24, 36 months here. We've been on basically an incline in prices. I think this year we've kind of at least found the ceiling for now. Does that get redefined next year? Yeah, it possibly might. I don't know. None of us really know that. But what I would say is that we're probably going to be trading these cattle in a similar range. I don't know if we can reach as high as what we've had, but somewhere in the range of where we're at. You look at the board today and you look at the fat cattle contracts 12 months out or so, and those numbers look almost ridiculous in terms of 215, 225, 220, 230. I mean, I have no fear that we won't be in those kind of ranges. I have a lot more fear to just make the assumption that we're going to have fat cattle in the ranges of 270 or 275 or 280, which is what it's going to take for some of them most high priced cattle to probably break even. I just think that would be incredibly optimistic to believe that we're going to crack that kind of number going forward. But I also think with the same confidence that it would be pretty unbelievable to have the idea that we're going to be selling 210 or 215 fat cattle 12 months from now due to if nothing else changes from the supply and demand issues like what we've already talked about. So that's why I feel pretty confident in where we are. I just think we have to be a little realistic. And with these kind of numbers, the kind of math that we're using, the kind of value in these cattle, I mean, risk protection is key, even for the cow-calf guy. And I think that's pretty important that we all need to be thinking about that long term.
Yeah. That kind of goes into another subject I want to talk about, and I want to do that in our next segment. So let's take a break here. And when we come back, I want to just, you've given some recap a little bit about the Week in the Rockies sale. Let's just kind of go through that again briefly. We're going to be fairly topical on this. I mean, not get into the down and dirty on it, but give us an idea. And then I also want to talk about, as ranchers, what do we need to be doing as we prepare for this, as we look ahead and marketing our calves this fall, those kinds of things. So we'll do that when we come back. Agrocarbon works with farmers and ranchers to implement practices that promote soil health and add a new revenue stream. Now, when you work with Agrocarbon, you'll gain a partner that provides flexible payments and local agronomic expertise for your row crop or your range or even your pasture operations. Partnering with Agrocarbon is an investment in your land and your ranch's future. Get started today at agrocarbon.com. Clint Berry is with us. He's a rep for Superior Livestock. He is out of San Angelo, Texas. And Clint, as we kind of wrap up our conversation here, I want to get through a little bit of this sale, Week in the Rockies, that took place a few weeks ago, and kind of give us a recap on that. It's definitely, as we were talking about earlier, the market's not at the high level that the Corn Belt was, but golly, these prices are still pretty good. So just in general, let's start at the steers. I want to work through some of these different classes of cattle and kind of what you felt in this market as we see ourselves here in July.
Sure. And I think the longer weaned, larger weight cattle, longer age cattle, that they're still probably the highest in demand, which that's not an epiphany. That's the way it is every year. So, but I think the strength there in the yearlings or feeders, that's still pretty similar in price point. The fall delivery cattle, that's where I saw some change, and like I said, I was throwing out some basic numbers from our region 2, which is the Northern Plains area and stuff. A lot of them calves were $15, $20, maybe $25 different. It's a little hard. You really got to dial into our data, because you got to remember, when you're looking at a sale report from Superior, we're selling forward contracted cattle, which means the cattle, I'm shipping some cattle tomorrow. I sold them on that sale last week. That's pretty immediate delivery in my mind. We also sold cattle on the same sale the same day that we're not going to ship till November. That's pretty far delivery. That's a different animal. It's a different dead month. They may both be 600 pounds, but they're not the same animal. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful when you're looking at that data. But I would say those are, kind of across the board. The weaned calves and the balling calves were a little softer. I would say somewhere around that general term of 15, 20, maybe $25, which is, like I said in our earlier segment, that sounds like a lot of money, because we're used to that being a lot of money. But when we're selling $4.50, $5 calves, that's a small percentage change. And it's understandable when you think about it like that. It's talking a 5, maybe 10% at max change in the value there. Will we see some more weakening or some strengthening? I would say it's going to be like any market now. We're going to operate in a window that we have an idea where we're at and what's the buyer's attitude on how far they want to stick their necks out to. Because I don't think I'm the only guy out there that knows that the forward contracts on the live cattle in the next 12 months are too weak right now to be realistic. I think everybody else would agree the idea of them being above anything that we've ever seen before is also probably unrealistic. So, there's going to be a little realism injected into the market there, but I want producers to know that this market is still tremendous. I mean, we are still selling cattle at the bare minimum $150 to $200 over break evens right now, which means there's still a ton of optimism there that feeders have got in the market and where we're going. And I think that's what's important. But I would stress, when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars for a loaded truck of cattle, we need to have some precaution and risk management to be smart about it. So talk to your advisors, talk to those that you feel confident with, but take care and protect yourself. Make sure you're safe in this market. If you have to give up a little money for an insurance on your investment, that's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah. Clint, you and I talked about it a bit ago, but about 53 to 60% of the U.S. cattle inventory is in some sort of drought-affected area. Our operation being one of those. And so do you have any indication, maybe a little too early to tell at this point, because, if the monsoon kicks in and we see some moisture in some areas that's been pretty droughted out, might bring up some of that late fall grass or late summer fall grass. But at the same time, any indication that we're going to see some effects with some of this drought cattle? And of course, the first thing would be to get these calves off these cows so they can rebuild and get them sent off.
You're already hearing some rumors of 3 and 4 weight calves being yanked off cows and sent to town just to alleviate some pressure on that forage base to hold that cow herd together. I have to assume, and I know I've got a lot of customers that are pretty nervous about, maybe they're not usually pulling calves off cows in October for shipping or weaning at that time. And, they're not sure if they can go that long in these drought conditions. And I understand that. And the reality is next week we could be having a different discussion based on the weather, but there's going to be some strategies there that are going to be pressured to make sure that we can hold these cows together. Because let's not forget, we have been culling hard for the last 5 years on these cows. We have the smallest cow herd in 7 decades, but you know what else we have? We have the youngest cow herd in 7 decades. Everybody that I know has culled every old, bad, bad-tempered animal out there and been receiving great salvage value on the way up. So, there's going to be a lot of pressure to hold these cows together. And the one thing I would say that I have to believe, even for our producers that are in the harshest drought areas, and it's bad for them. I understand it. We all go through it. We all seem to have to take our turn at it. But most of these cows, because of the ages and how young they are and how deep we've culled for so many years, if these cows do get dispersed out of an area, for the most part, I think they're going to get picked up. I think they're going to stay in production. They just may have a new zip code.
Yeah.
That kind of a deal. And so I'm not fearful of losing 1 million head of cattle off the inventory or something. I just think we may get some with wheels under them, and that'll change. But, there's still not a lot of pressure on heifers. Our data, I think CGI's data, USDA's, what I've seen as best I can from Cattle Facts, I don't think there's any pressure point out there that's showing that there's a huge sign or signal that there's a heifer retention going on right now to build to it. And that's partially drought driven because the economics say we should be doing that. But we're still seeing heifers sell $25 to $40 back, which mathematically speaking for a feeder value, that is about accurate. And I know producers don't like to hear that, but animal for animal, from a feeding standpoint, a female she has less value. She hangs a less weighted carcass. She's less efficient on her cost of gains and her average daily gain. That's why the valuation is there. But that clear number does point out that there's not a lot of pressure on replacements. We've got a few cases where we're selling heifers for steer price or above. Those are pretty unique. That would certainly be a unicorn, not the norm, because I would tell you the norm is going to be, when you're selling your heifers, depending on what they weigh, they're going to be $25 to $40 back a steer price.
Yeah. Pretty
standardized. Yeah. And as long as we're seeing that screams to me that there's no rebuilding going on.
Yeah. Okay, one other class of cattle, and I know this is not something that's, we're trading across some of these sales that you're repping necessarily, but where are you hearing on this bred market? It's still pretty strong. It was strong earlier in the spring and early summer.
I would agree with you. Sporadic is also the word I would use, but that happens with bred stock. Yeah. Bred stock's based on a salvage value plus. The problem is that plus is huge. I've seen bred heifers vary in value $1,000 a head. And to put that in translation, that's 20 or 25% of the value of the animal itself. That's a pretty fair number right now. But we are at this time here in July, and at this time, that is, this is not the bred heifer season for that. That comes later in the fall. We usually have at Superior, we usually have a really nice run of bred stock on our August sale at the Bighorn Classic, 3rd week of August. And that's usually a good first sampling, but it's still a buyer's market. I don't know that, though. Just honestly speaking, I don't know if there's a better value in the entire beef chain than the young bred animal. We're selling, just pick a number like $4,500 on a bred heifer. Well, I'm going to be conservative. We got way up values at $1.80, maybe $2. We're selling, it's pretty hard to sell a calf that doesn't bring 2,600, even if it's just a lightweight balling calf. That's one season turn will return that investment on an animal, even if they don't breed back and you keep them in the herd. I mean, and it's not very often in the beef business we can say that. We usually plan for it taking several years, but you could almost salvage it out if she weaned the calf off and pay for herself in the first year, pay for that investment. I don't know. I just think that I can tell you, me personally, I would have a lot more risk tied up in buying a $45,000 or $5,000 bred heifer to calve than I would in buying a plus $3,000 animal, holding on feed for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too simplistic of a look, but I don't think there's a better value in the market than right now than for these young bred animals if people's got the forage base to be able to run them.
Yeah, that's for sure. You talked about sale coming up. The Bighorn Classic is when you kind of have some of that bred market, but let's back up just a little bit. Yes. I know the Video Royale sale's coming up the end of the month, so the deadlines as far as being in that sale have already passed, but at the
Correct.
Same time, that sale's coming up. Kind of go through us on your schedule for Superior Livestock.
Sure. Yep. The Video Royale based out of Winnemucca, Nevada there. It's scheduled right now for July 27th through the 31st. But it could be a little flexible depending on what those consignments look like, whether it's a 3, 4, 5 day sale. Mm-hmm. Just depends on how that all gets put together. Then the next one following that will be that Bighorn Classic sale based out of Sheridan, Wyoming. And that sale dates are the 17th of August to the 21st right now, with a catalog deadline on July the 31st. So if you're wanting to get in, like I said, we've passed the deadline for the Video Royale, but if you're wanting to get in that sale at Sheridan, the Bighorn Classic, reach out to your local rep or go to superiorlivestock.com. We'll get you in touch with a rep. But that deadline is the 31st of July to have your paperwork turned in to lock your spot in there. Both of them will be great sales. We'll have large offerings. They may not be historic volumes because honestly, as a company, we're running a little ahead of schedule on some of the cattle sold because a lot of the producers have jumped ahead. A lot of my customers have. My team alone we're roughly about 20% ahead of schedule right now because guys were excited about the market early and sold early.
Yep, for sure. Well, like you said, it's still a good market. Look at doing some things to protect yourself. Might be a good year to be looking at that sooner than later to be doing that. So anyway, Clint, always good to visit with you. Appreciate your knowledge in the industry, your view on it, and we look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it.
You bet. Clint Berry joining us here on the program today. He is based out of St. Angelo, Texas. Has been a rep for Superior Livestock now for a number of years. And again, that website, if you want to find out more information about sale results as well as upcoming sales for Superior Livestock, that website is superiorlivestock.com. And don't forget, you can also kind of see what's tracking along in between sales by going there to the country page on that website. We'll be back with more after this.
A high-functioning rumen drives herd performance, gut health, and profitability. Levucel SC by Lala Man Animal Nutrition is the only natural-occurring rumen-specific active dry yeast probiotic selected to optimize rumen function, boost fiber digestion, and help you get more out of your forage and feed. No matter how you supplement your herd, including Levucel SC can help your cows do more on what they already have. Discover the right formulation for your herd at chooselevucelsc.com.
And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Dr. Elizabeth Ballou. She is a beef nutritionist with Purina. And Dr. Ballou, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to visiting with you today.
Well, as we were kind of chatting a little bit before we started here, both of us come from multi-generational ranching families. Interestingly enough, your family's been doing it about almost twice as long as mine, and I've been doing it 5 generations. You guys been 8 generations in your ranching heritage and your family ranching operations. And so tell us a little bit about that because, boy, I tell you what, that's not something you see every day.
Yeah, it's definitely an honor to be in that situation. So my husband and I, we have 2 kids, Janine and Henry, and we farm with my father-in-law, and my kids on my husband's side are going to be 8th generation in that operation. And then on my side, ironically, they will be 5th generation. So we bought into my family farm a couple of years ago. So definitely something that, like I said, comes with a lot of pressure, but look forward to being able to continue that and growing up our kids in that type of opportunity.
I think for what you do as a nutritionist yourself, but in just in terms of as you talk with other producers out there, there's that background that you bring to those conversations, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's really powerful because it's not just armchair quarterbacking, it's the fact that you're doing it yourself.
Right. And one of the things that I visit with producers about when we come and talk with them is I understand that sometimes the requests I'm making or decisions I'm trying to help get to do come with challenges, but those are the same challenges that I could face on my own farm. And so some of those logistics, it just kind of eases that conversation because we're doing it too. We have those same opportunities and challenges, and just look forward to how can we overcome those to really better that operation out.
Now, as a nutritionist, and I know you visit with a lot of producers all across the country. With that in mind, what are you finding the operations that seem to be really just making it work, the success that they're finding? What's some key elements that you see across some of these successful operations?
So, first is measuring what you have, right? We can't make changes or make improvements or say, hey, this didn't work because of this if we don't know where we started. And so, really having a good record keeping program is probably the number one thing that I see really progressive farmers and ranchers utilizing. The second thing would be knowing what resources they have, like hay testing or hay inventory, or knowing how much their cattle's weaning weights are, right? Those are big numbers that can really help make decisions moving forward. And then lastly, this is probably the hardest one,
Okay.
and something that we deal with at home is just what changes do I need to make to really keep this going and be productive? My family, my husband's family, has been in the farming business since 1834, right? What worked 100 years ago, what worked 50 years ago, what worked almost 200 years ago are different. And so we have to be able to adapt, and we have to be able to realize is that cattle genetics are changing, our resources are changing, and just the ability to adapt. I don't like the word change because that always has, a negative connotation to it, but just really adapt to really what we are trying to do to continue this lifestyle. So knowing what you have, taking inventory, and just being ready to adapt.
Dr. Ballou, that third thing you mentioned, I know by the way you mentioned it, it's one of the hardest things to do. And I like the fact that you said not really change, but adapt. And that's, I think, a struggle that a lot of operations have, even some that are successful. You really got to force yourself to just always be, and I'm going to call it learning, and not just always be closed in and say, well, we did this the last 3 years, let's keep doing it, but just be open to learning, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot to learn from the past, but there's also a lot to learn from the future, right? And so just being able to adapt and try something and see if it works and go from there. So yeah, I think I'm going to use that phrase, adapt.
Yeah.
Not change, adapt. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Something just in relation to maybe a little bit different direction what we were just talking about, but I think it's important from the successful operations standpoint as we look at one of the key things in there. And you've said this before too, that agriculture is really a relationship business. I myself find that that's important too. It's having a network, having other people that you can either bounce ideas off or hear new ideas, as we were just talking about adapting to. So expand on that a little bit further, why you feel that's such an important aspect.
Yeah. The ag community, while it might look pretty vast, it's pretty small, right? There's a lot of cattle ranchers, a lot of cattle producers, a lot of row crop farmers, but holistically, right, it's a small population of people that get this job done. And so just being able to rely on those relationships to keep it going, right, to feed a human population, all of those things. But for me, whenever I have a partner in a handshake relationship and know that I can trust somebody, that's really what I'm looking for because they're vested in what I'm doing. We say the handshake agreement, right? A handshake business, but really that just comes down to having a trusted partner right? And doing what's right for your operation and what you need to do to continue.
And I think that trusted partner, not just in maybe your neighbors, but it's in the companies you're doing business with.
Yep. It's
Isn't
in
it?
the whole ag sector,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we got to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Along the same vein of asking you the question, what are you seeing some of the successful operations doing? I'm going to ask you this question. What are some of the biggest challenges that as you talk with producers, that you keep hearing over and over?
So when I think about that is, what are my pregnancy rates? What are my weaning percentages, right? And that's one thing that I really focus on with people is they don't make it to weaning, she's an open cow in my book, right? But those are always the challenges. But then also having enough feed resources to feed these beasts that we're feeding, right? Cattle today are designed for growth and performance, and they're not 2000 model cows anymore, right? They're bigger, they have higher energy requirements, and that leads to their whole host of productivity. So I always focus on how can I match the cow to what forage resources I have. Because if you go the opposite way, right, you might not be hitting the mark on what these cows are really going to do from a genetic potential. So just feed the beast you have, feed the cow you have, and know what cow you have. Because I always joke with producers that I can get a cow body weight plus or minus 600 pounds. It's not very close, right?
Yeah.
And I say that jokingly, but if you're not weighing your cows and you don't know how much your cows weigh, the eyeball test is not super accurate. But it is an eye opener. If you don't know how much your cows weigh, you don't know how much to feed them.
My rule of thumb on that is ask somebody what their cow weighs and then add 200 pounds.
Minimum.
Yeah, minimum. Yeah, because everybody thinks they run 1,200 pound cows out there,
Yep.
right? Okay, you're kind of headed down the road of matching that cow up to the environment, and in the vein of where we're at this year, and we see about 75% of the country in some sort of a drought situations, some more extreme than others. Boy, we're looking at a time of the year where we really need to be looking at nutrition, don't we?
Yeah. And so from a fetal programming aspect, everything is going to be predetermined in utero, right? Like you can capitalize and you can maximize those genetic potentials on this side of life, but really it starts in utero. And so I always tell folks, like, that's 15 months down the road. If you're weaning a calf, like, that's a long haul game, right? So the decisions you make today are going to impact your checkbook 15, 20 months down the road. So meeting her where she's at and what she needs to keep that calf in utero to optimize its genetics after birth is really key. So there's couple different ways you can get that done, but cows are worth some money today, and so let's just make sure we feed the cow we have so that 15, 20 months down the road we're capitalizing on those decisions.
Yeah. As we look ahead into the next several months and prepare for fall of the year, even beyond that into those winter months when the nutritional value starts to weigh into the feed resources, or we're moving to substitute feed resources, what some piece of advice that you would offer to folks as we look ahead, maybe the 3 and even 6 to 9 months out?
Yeah, the one thing from the immediate future, right, is if you are in areas that are short on forage resources, early wean that calf. That cow should be in second stage of gestation at that time. That's when those muscle cells and fat cells are being developed, and that's really what you're going to get paid for when you sell a weaned calf. And so early wean the calf. For every 3 calves you early wean, you save 1 cow's forage requirement. Okay. So that would be my immediate response. And that also allows the cow more time to get back into proper body condition score, right? We want her to be in a 6, at least 60 days before calving, because that's when colostrum is going to be developed. So if you're short on forages, early wean the calf. I think that's a tool in our toolbox we don't use enough. But then forage test your hay. Forage test your feed resources, your hay, so that you know what you have and you can feed appropriately to meet those cows' requirements at different stages of production. Okay, so whether you got young growing heifers or you got lactating cows, right? Feed who you have based on what feed resources you have. So those would be the 2 things that I would say, long-term, short-term game. that folks should be thinking about.
All right. Well, good to visit with you on this. And I think one of the things our guest, I think it was last week, mentioned about how use your feed folks like you guys. I know you have the ability, if folks go to your website, they can call and visit with you guys. And so if folks are interested in having a little bit more in-depth discussion about, okay, how do we match this, whether it's my mineral needs or how do we match this up to your feed test that you said or the forage that we have out there, where do people go to find more information?
Yeah, your best local resource is going to be your Purina dealer. On our website, we have a dealer locator if you don't know who that is, but they're going to be your most local, best recommendation for those regional differences. But always go to the PurinaMills.com website. You can get in touch with one of us. You can submit a question. We'll answer that. But yeah, we've got a couple different options depending on how it works best for you.
You bet. Well, Dr. Blue, good to visit with you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And again, that was Dr. Elizabeth Ballou, beef nutritionist with Purina. Well, stick around. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at our long-range weather as meteorologist Don Day steps in.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY, that's RAINDAY, for free shipping and 10%.
Today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer with epronamectin for 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Keep your herd grazing, gaining weight without that extra parasite pressure. If you want to find out more, you can go to their website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, joining us now is meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our long-range weather. And Don, the extreme heat that we saw here recently definitely did start to get things kind of prime that pump and starting to see that monsoonal flow really starting to take shape, which is bringing some moisture in different parts of the country.
Yeah, and especially these desert Southwest, the Central and Southern Rockies, parts of the Great Basin. And this subtropical moisture is something that's going to be circulating through a good part of the West. And at times, what we see in these patterns is the ring of fire, the moisture going around high pressure, can sometimes bring showers and thunderstorms to portions of the upper Midwest and the Corn Belt as well. So it's going to be a really big factor. And it's all being driven by the heat and the high pressure ridge that a lot of folks have experienced. Boy, some very extreme heat there at the beginning of July for the northern plains, parts of the northern Rockies. That is what's helped actually initiate some of that moisture from the subtropics to come north. So there's been help, and there's more help on the way for areas, especially west of the Continental Divide.
Mm-hmm. As we look ahead for the latter half of July and early August, just from a real quick standpoint, biggest winners, biggest losers across the country. And I know some of that's going to be very, very sporadic, as we have seen all year. There's been pockets and holes at anywhere, different parts of the country. But from your opinion, kind of where are the biggest winners and losers that you're going to see as we get to the latter half of July and 1st of August?
Yeah, for that period of time, it really looks like the winners will be areas that are in the worst drought conditions, and that will be many areas of the West, as this pattern lends itself to very heavy rainfall producing thunderstorms. So I would say that those parts of the Western United States will be winners. The losers is actually out into the parts of the United States that actually had a pretty wet June and early July, and that's the Central Plains, especially the south central plains of the U.S. Texas, which has gone through some flooding here recently, is actually going to see some hotter, drier weather develop, especially in north central, North Texas. This is going to get into Oklahoma, parts of Kansas. And I also see a part of the western edges of the Corn Belt maybe getting into some heat and dryness that could be rather extensive. Around the edges of those areas I just mentioned, that ring of fire, those showers and thunderstorms will affect some of those areas. But we do see a dry hole in parts of the central United States for the latter half of July into early August. Also, we're seeing a little bit in the way of weak tropical activity developing in the Gulf Coast region. So parts of the southeastern United States, Georgia, Florida, maybe parts of the Carolinas and mid-Atlantic are going to see an uptick in some needed rain shower and thunderstorm activity. So the middle part of that country is an area we'll need to watch.
Okay. Now, something, and I know you're working on trying to figure out more about what this is going to mean or will mean as we look ahead. And that is the drastic low temperatures that we're seeing here is right smack in the middle of the summer, that the North Pole is considerably cooler than normal.
Yeah. So the Danish Meteorological Institute has been tracking conditions in the high Arctic since 1958 in terms of keeping track of temperatures throughout the year. And going back to 1958, what we found is the month of June was the coldest that they've been recording since 1958, and not just a little bit, not by a tenth of a degree or something, but a remarkably cold June in the high northern latitudes. And in fact, cruise ships around Greenland and Iceland have had to redirect traffic because of ice flows and higher ice for this late in the season than they're used to. Now, what is interesting is you contrast that with the heat waves that we've seen in North America and Europe this summer. And then you have the opposite contrast in those higher latitudes. So when you see something that is this off the charts, off the average, and such a strong anomaly, and the fact that, I hate to say this, but the days are getting shorter, and they're getting a lot shorter up there in those higher latitudes. So there's going to be a carryover as we get into fall and winter of those colder, higher latitudes. When I say higher latitudes, I'm talking way up there, 80 degrees north to the poles. But I think this is going to be a factor come fall and winter. It's a bit of a wild card like this very strong El Nino is. From what we're seeing going into fall and winter is a set of circumstances that we not necessarily have seen all of these kind of variables in place at the same time. So I just caution folks that the long-range seasonal forecasts are going to be very tricky as we go into fall and winter. There's a lot on the table that we've got to figure out.
All right. Just one final question, and this actually come from the captain, Tim O'Byrne. He'd emailed me the other day, and he said he'd seen a video on YouTube about how bad it was in 1936. And if you could just refresh us maybe back to that comparatively to maybe what we're seeing here in present day.
Well, yeah, so the 30s, if you look at the 1930s, especially across the lower 48 states, that is the hottest decade on record. And it was multiple years, and that year that was mentioned was one of the worst in terms of drought conditions. Although it's what we've seen so far this season, the displacement of the drought has been more west than into the wheat belt and the middle part of the country. But we definitely have seen episodes in our history to where not only was it a hot, dry summer, but multiple hot, dry summers. And of course, we put those 1930s in what we call the Dust Bowl years. Hopefully, we won't be talking about the 2020s as the second Dust Bowl.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Don, well, appreciate the update here today, and we'll talk to you here in a couple weeks.
We'll see you then.
All right. And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. You can tune in each and every morning like I do and follow along with him on his daily video podcast. You can find the link to that YouTube channel by going to dayweather.com. We're going to be talking data centers on the next Working Ranch Radio Show. Yeah, I know it's a controversial topic, and I think we can get through it, so be sure to join us on the next edition. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.